This video is meant to show you a few of the effect tools in the Light-O-Rama sequence editor, specifically the fade up, fade down, and set intensity tools. Other videos will cover other tools in the sequence editor. So let's first try the fade up tool, which is this guy here, the triangle with the up arrow. Click on that, and now we can select a set of channels and a time range. And these 4 channels now that I selected will fade up over the time range that I selected from 0%, in other words completely off, to 100%, in other words as bright as possible. The lights that you hooked up to these 4 channels will be as bright as possible by the time it gets here, but it'll gradually become that bright over the course of time. So let's play the sequence and watch these channel buttons as play progresses. The channel buttons will give you an idea of how the lights will behave when you hook them up to these channels via your Light-O-Rama controllers. So play and watch the channel buttons. So you'll see they gradually got brighter over time. They started from being off and got as bright as they could be. Let's try that out again just to see it one more time. The fade down tool is very similar. It will fade down from 100% to 0%. So let's play again, and these channels will fade up and then fade down. Now the set intensity tool is kind of like the on tool, which we saw in a different video. So let's first turn all of these channels, these 4 channels on, and if we play it, you'll see the channel buttons go fully on. Compare that to how the set intensity tool behaves. You'll see these channels are half on. In other words, the lights that are hooked up to them will be half as bright as they can be, while the lights that are hooked up to these 4 channels will be as bright as they can be. When we play the sequence, compare how these channel buttons look to how these channel buttons look. So you'll see these are about half as bright as these ones. Now, that's the basic usage of the set intensity, fade up, and fade down tools. But there's more that you can do with them. By default, the set intensity tool allowed us to set the intensity to 50% brightness. But you can also make it any other level of brightness that you want. You could make it 80% bright, you could make it 20% bright, you could make it 37% bright if you wanted to. So first let's use the off tool here just to get a blank canvas. And now let's go back to the set intensity tool. And like we said before, if we apply it by default, it will be 50% brightness. But if we click on this button over here, it looks like the set intensity button, but it has a question mark in front of it. That opens up this intensity tool dialog. And it gives you 10 different options, 10%, 20%, and so forth, up to 100%. And you'll see 50% is the one that's selected. If I set it to 70%, you see these are slightly brighter than these cells over here. If I select it to 30%, then it's less bright than both of these. So these are 50% on, these are 70%, and this is 30%. So let's play the sequence and watch this channel button, and it'll be about half on, then it'll get somewhat brighter, and then it'll get dimmer, and then it'll turn off. So there you go. Now, I said before you could set it to 20% or 80%, and I also said you could set it to 37%, and if you look at these values here, there's no 37. So how do we do that? Well, you click on this Edit button, and that brings up a dialog that'll allow you to change the values that are listed here. So if I don't want 40%, I actually want 37%. Just change setting 4 to 37 and accept, and now The options are 10, 20, 30, 37, 50, 60. I click on 37, and those lights will actually be 37% on. 37% as bright as they can be. Now there's a similar thing for the fade up and fade down tool. If we, let's close this intensity dialog first, select the fade up tool, and as we saw before, it would fade up from 0 to 100. If we click on the fade tool options, we'll see something similar to the intensity tool options that we saw before, except there are two sides to it. This side is the fade up. The top side is the fade up that is currently selected, and the bottom side is the fade down that's currently selected. So up here we have this selected, which means fade up is 0 to 100, and down here we have this one selected, which means fade down is 100 to 0. We could change fade down to 75-25 and change fade up to 0 to 50. And now if we fade up, it goes from 0% to 50% rather than to 100%. It only goes halfway up. In other words, these lights will fade from being off to being half as bright as they can be. And now fade down I have set to 75 and 25. If I click on fade down, it will fade from 75 to 25 rather than 100 to 0. And similarly to the intensity tool, you can edit and change the values that you want. So for example, I could set preset 4 to be a low value of 3 and a high value of 7 and accept. And now I have this option here to either fade up from 3% to 7%, or I could fade down from 7% to 3%. So that's about it for the tool options, the fade up tool, fade down tool, and set intensity tool. I hope this helps.